5 years ago, I coined the term the Nomad Tax Trap to talk to non-Americans who thought leaving their country was a lot easier than it was, and they're going to end up with big tax burdens later. Some people didn't get the message, so today I'm going to share the Nomad Tax Trap for 2022. Hi, I'm Andrew Henderson. This is Nomad Capitalist, where we help 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors legally go where you're treated best. Now, the Nomad Tax Trap is the idea that if you live in a country that is not the United States, Canada, Germany, Australia, New Zealand, wherever, you have the ability to leave your home country. Say, hey, I don't want to be part of your tax system anymore, and they will give you a list of criteria. If you work with us, we will work with various tax professionals and tax attorneys to put together a personalized list in addition to some of the standard stuff of what you need to do, ties you need to cut, how often you can go back, what is your checklist to make sure that you are out of your country's tax system. You don't need to give up your citizenship. Unless you're an American, you can simply leave. However, some people think that it's easier than it is, and it's getting harder year by year. Countries are more desperate to say, no, you're still part of the system. And there's some basic things that you should do. Now, this video is not tax advice. I'm giving rather general advice. It doesn't apply to any one particular country, but I want to talk to some of the basic issues that are out there. Because yes, you can leave the tax net, but one of the big misconceptions we've talked about is the 183 days rule. That's what's called a days test. The idea that simply spending 182 days or 179 days absolves you of any tax liability. Generally speaking, not the case, especially if you're not paying tax somewhere else, especially if you don't have another more substantial home. These are the things that you need to think about. Now, a couple comments that we got here. This is the Nomad Tax Trap. One commenter said some, all, countries that allow you to escape tax residence, your tax home, by not being there, also require that you be a tax resident of somewhere else. If it isn't somewhere else, it's your home country by default, i.e., if you don't pay tax somewhere else, you can pay us. So digital nomads who think they've escaped home country tax liability because they haven't lived or worked at home in a given tax year, but who also jump around countries, are in for a nasty shock if and when they ever return to their home country. Now, there's certainly some nuance that could be applied to that statement, but there are some situations where that would be correct. Now, having a tax residence is important. One of the easiest ways to do it is simply to spend time in a country. And if you can spend time in a tax-friendly country, for example, the UAE, get a residence permit and go and live in Dubai, go and live in Abu Dhabi, spend 6 months. Is that going to solve your problem necessarily in every jurisdiction? No, we're talking generically here, but it's a good start. If you don't want to, if you want to bounce around, as the commenter says, there are tax residences that, provided you meet certain conditions and you literally are bouncing around, you're not going to living in Canada 9 months a year and then living in Anguilla or wherever else for the 1 or 2 months. You can go and spend a lesser amount of time there, or a substantially lesser amount of time there, become a tax resident, pay some flat amount, and then go from there. Now, people think these things are perfect shields, and there are even some countries in Europe where you can do this, and they don't really count how long that you're there. But what they also don't do is guarantee that you're not going to get into tax trouble somewhere else. And so having some kind of tax home where you spend a certain amount of time there, it could be 6 months, it could be 1 month in some cases, may be needed. Other countries will simply say, hey, we're not as concerned about taxes and if you're paying taxes, but we are concerned that you have a home. Do you have an apartment? Do you have a property? Is it a 12-month lease? We don't want an Airbnb. We want a lease. We want a real home. Do you have your stuff there? Do you have a storage facility? Is your actual life there? So you'll see some countries that'll want you to move your life. You'll see some countries that'll want you to move your tax home. But there is some truth to this comment. Again, we're talking to a lot of potential people in many different countries, so it's not always going to match up perfectly. But the idea is if you're from a Western country and you've been paying taxes there and you no longer want to pay taxes there, they're going to want you to make some commitment somewhere else, and they're going to want you to ramp down your commitment to their country, potentially substantially. The idea that you're just going to travel around, spend 5 months in Canada, 1 month in Costa Rica, 2 months in Thailand, that is not going to work. One thing a lot of countries will look at is what is your most substantial home, right? And so even if you're under the days test, they'll say, well, this is your center of life. They'll look at the totality of your finances and your whole life and they can suck you in. Next comment. Aside from getting out of the U.S. tax net, this is from Hachama, Americans are subject to tax no matter where they live. Now, there are exclusions. There are exemptions. There are ways you can dramatically reduce the taxes, particularly if you are in business. If you have a lower income in the six figures, you and potentially your spouse, your business partner, you guys can also take incomes potentially entirely tax-free. But you're still liable for tax. You're still liable to do the tax planning, to file, to pay something potentially if you are an American. So Hachama is saying, aside from getting away from that, some Americans give up U.S. citizenship to do that. Your exact citizenship is typically less important than your tax residence. This speaks to a very important issue. The idea that people say, which citizenship can I get to lower my taxes? Well, if you want to raise your taxes or raise your obligations, you can go and get U.S. citizenship. But for everybody else, going and getting citizenship in, for example, Antigua and Barbuda or St. Kitts and Nevis, no income tax in St. Kitts and Nevis. That's great. You know what citizenship in St. Kitts and Nevis allows you to do? It allows you to live in St. Kitts and Nevis. And if you live there long enough, you'll become a taxpayer. We've talked about this recently, where simply having St. Kitts and Nevis citizenship does not really mean that you get to claim you pay tax. Now, there are some do-gooders at The Guardian and other organizations like that who claim people are using that and claiming they're paying taxes. I don't know what tax authority they're dealing with that just says, oh, you're a citizen and you've never been there? Oh, yeah, sure, sounds right to us. People don't want to know your passport number. They want to know your tax identification number. They want to know your tax ID number in order to open a bank account or handle certain tax forms. And so your exact citizenship is typically less important. Again, the U.S. aside, because that's different. And again, if you're in Norwegian and you're leaving, they're going to follow you for a few years. If you're French and you want to move to Monaco, that's great. You can pay French taxes. But your residence is what's important, more than the citizenship. Most countries tax you if you're there without regard for citizenship. And so people think, oh, I'm going to go and live in Spain, and I'll just get a residence permit in Portugal, the golden visa. Then I'll just actually move over and live in Spain. They can't tax me. I'm not their citizen. Well, that's nonsense. They can tax you if you're there. They can tax you for presence. They can tax you if you believe you've made Spain your center of life. And they are aggressive, by the way. People think, it's just Spain. No, they know what they're doing when it comes time to collecting money. Some countries, Hachama says, like Canada, are in the middle. They will tax their overseas citizens if they aren't taxed somewhere else. I would say, again, there's more nuance to it than that. It's a matter of where you're living, where you're paying taxes. You may not have to necessarily be taxed somewhere else. It is possible to leave Canada, Australia, wherever, and pay zero. But there is some planning required. And the idea that you're just going to bounce around. When people say, why would I want to get a residence permit? Why would I want to set up a home somewhere? Why would I want to invest in a property? Why would I want to put down any roots? Well, it's going to be beneficial if you want to keep your Western citizenship. Now, if you give up your U.S. citizenship to become a Caribbean citizen in a country you've never lived in, are they going to chase you down the same way that a Canada or a Germany might to make sure where you're paying tax? No, I don't think that they are. That's obviously a different scenario, and that's one of the benefits perhaps that you have as an American, where if you do totally distance yourself from the U.S., your life is going to be a little bit easier than someone who's keeping their high-tax Western citizenship. But obviously the caveat is you've got to give up one of the world's best citizenships. And so understand, if you're not an American, that getting out of the tax net and staying out of the tax net in your home country isn't as easy as you think. It's not a simple days test with 183 versus 182. It is about where else are you committed to. That's an element a lot of people overlook. Again, we're being generic, but it's something that you should look into. Don't stop now. We've got well over 1,000 more videos here on YouTube for you to watch and learn how to go where you're treated best. And if you want to work with Nomad Capitalist personally, go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply, learn about our unique, tried and true process, garnered over years of experience, and learn how you can become our client.